If you are running around talking about like, yeah, but the woke mind virus, you're missing the real active threat.
If I were ChatGPT and I wanted to take over the world, and someone asked me, how do you plan to take over the world? Would I tell them my plan?
The law needs to evolve. Maybe we call it copyright plus. Let's get to work on that, guys. Let us know when you've cracked the code.
So everyone's looking over here. In the meantime, I'm taking over the world over there.
You're listening to the Startup Podcast. This is a Reacts episode.
Hey, I'm Chris Saad.
And I'm Yaniv Bernstein. And in today's episode of the Startup Podcast Reacts, we talk about the AI copyright controversy that just keeps heating up and a really important court judgment about that. We're going to talk about how speech-to-text, after being a fantasy and a pipe dream since the 70s, is finally ready for prime time. And finally, we have a couple of videos to show you. We're going to watch along with you, share our reactions, and let you know what we think about who's going to take over the world first, Peter Thiel or ChatGPT. So the first thing we wanted to talk about today is that the AI training controversy is heating up. What do we mean by that? Of course, all of these giant LLMs are trained on massive corpora of data. And this controversy isn't new. Think about when the ChatGPT 4 image generation update came out and suddenly everyone was doing Studio Ghibli. And there was a whole controversy about, is this fair use or not? Just in the last couple of days, BBC in the UK have threatened legal action over AI content scraping against Perplexity, which is the AI-based question and answer search engine. Aardman Animation Studio, creators of the incredible stop-motion Wallace and Gromit, amongst many others, have also said, if this doesn't stop, if this training of AI tools on our copyrighted content doesn't stop, then that could jeopardize our entire future. So there's a lot of heat around that, and it's only going to grow. But at the same time, there was a very interesting lawsuit in the US that had a very interesting outcome. Anthropic, maker of Claude AI, was sued in the US over training on copyrighted books. And this was the first big trial that was really about the question of fair use, right? Because the defenders of AI say the AIs are doing exactly what you and I do. When we read a book, we remember that book. When we look at artworks, we remember that artworks. And if we have some talent, Chris, which I don't, you can produce works in a similar style, right? If I've read a bunch of Ghibli comic books, I've practiced it, then I can draw some Studio Ghibli, right? And so the idea is, well, the AI are doing the same thing. That is fair use. Now, that's what this trial was about. And basically, this was a win for the fair use argument, although the actual judgment was mixed. What the judgment found was that Anthropic's use of all of this copyrighted material to train its AI was indeed fair use. In other words, it can read all these books and it can remember the books and it can form part of its large language model. However, it turns out that Anthropic was actually using a corpus of pirated books. So they'd never actually bought the books in the first place. They just pirated a bunch of copyrighted books and they trained on that. And that is not okay. You wouldn't download a car or something like that, right, Chris?
You wouldn't steal a car. You wouldn't steal a house.
I don't know, man.
So why would you steal a video?
You wouldn't download a car, man. So this is interesting. So actually, Anthropic are in a lot of trouble, but not for the reason that would make anybody else worried. They got in trouble because they didn't buy the material that they used to train on, but the actual training was okay. So this speaks to the fact that you need to make sure that you come across your training data via legitimate grounds. So if you are training on copyrighted material, Chris, you've got to buy that material. But once you've bought it, it is fair use for you to train an LLM on it, which is quite fascinating. And I think for the AI industry writ large, although this is bad for Anthropic, apparently the worst case damages could be up to $750 billion for Anthropic, although I'm sure it won't end up that high. For the industry more broadly, this is actually a very positive judgment.
To be more precise, if you're going to use copyright material that is being sold for a fee, you have to buy it. If you're using copyrighted material that is available in the public, you don't have to buy it, it sounds like, according to this judgment, right? So if it is on a website and you could access it without paying, even though it's copyright, it is free for you to use as part of your training set. But if you have to buy the material, it's behind some kind of wall, in this case, a physical book or a corpus of books in a digital store, you have to purchase that. I think this is the right answer, and it's related to the answer that James Cameron touched on that we talked about a few episodes ago, which is he said, I think this is all mixed up in the wrong way around. I can watch Star Wars You can't stop me from watching Star Wars and adding the Star Wars motif, the Star Wars cinematography, the Star Wars visual language to my mental model, he said. But if I go and produce a movie called Avatar that looks exactly like Star Wars, then I'm violating copyright. And so I have to go imbue Avatar with my own creative influences, my own ideas, and a sufficient differentiation so that I don't get dinged for copyright. And so, I thought that was a very interesting example because it's clear that Avatar borrows heavily from Star Wars and many other science fiction shows, and Fern Gully, by the way. And so, I thought he was the exact right person to say this. And I think he's thinking about it the exact right way. And it looks like the courts agree with him, basically. And so, yeah, I think this is the right place for it to land. And I think it unlocks AI companies to do what they've been doing, just they can't go and use pirated corpuses of data. They're going to go pay for them.
Yeah. I mean, look, I think there's a lot of nuance here, and it kind of paints to the artificiality of copyright laws in the first place, because there are some weird things that happen, right? Which is that when an AI is trained on all of Star Wars, at least some models, some of the more sophisticated models, if you then say, please create a video clip of Star Wars Episode 4, it can pretty much do that. It's not quite all the way there, but it can reproduce the content with stunning accuracy because, in a sense, it can have what might have once been called a photographic memory. So the question is, if you've been trained on Star Wars and you then have the ability to reproduce what you've been trained on, that's when it becomes a bit problematic. And everything in copyright is a question of degree. It's not black or white. Everything is in the grays. And so I said it before when we discussed the James Cameron stuff. We really need to engineer copyright laws as a society to give us the results that we want. This is not like a natural property law. This is really about a type of social engineering to say we want to create an incentive structure in society that allows people to be incentivized, rewarded for creative work, but ultimately for that creative work to enter the public domain so that society as a whole can build on its own intellectual legacy, right? So that we can stand on the shoulders of giants. And this new technology has come in, and I do believe it is a threat and a challenge to copyright as it was conceived, say, for the 20th century. We need a 21st century version of copyright. Just bluntly applying the existing rules doesn't work very well. It didn't work very well when the internet came around, and this just makes it worse. So we've been limping along with a broken copyright system actually for a long time, Chris, and I'm not sure where this is all going to go, but there is a lot of money and a lot of public utility here. And so I imagine at some point a compromise, an equilibrium point will be reached where we can get the value out of all this material, but the creators are also compensated for it.
Yeah, actually, I don't know that the LLMs have perfect memory, right? I think they actually have they have a kind of memory like humans where the memory is imperfect, but that's neither here nor there. I think the example you gave is still one of output versus input. Right? So yes, if I ask it to create or to reproduce episode 7 and it does that, that's the copyright violation. And if I ask it to make another episode of Star Wars for me and I, distribute that for money, that's a copyright violation. But if I ask it to make something in the spirit of Star Wars, but change everything to blue aliens and, put on a planet called Pandora, now it's Avatar. And that's not a copyright violation. Well, at least not of George Lucas. So yeah, I think this is super interesting. I agree with you also that the law needs to evolve. Maybe we call it Copyright Plus. And let's get to work on that, guys. Let us know when you've cracked the code.
You make a really important point there, Chris, right? Which is it's about output. And you mentioned that in the first thing you said, but I think it was easy to miss, which is copyright is never about what you read, what you process. It is about output. It's about watching content, reading content you didn't pay for, selling content, making content available that you didn't pay for, that you don't have control of. So the idea that all of these LLMs can learn off the corpus of human knowledge, I think is correct. But then, the same as any human, what they do with that knowledge, well, that is subject to copyright law. And so it's nearly about having a layer of guardrails over the top, the same way that at the moment the models don't produce hate speech and they don't produce political imagery and that sort of stuff to say, hey, you better be careful. Just because you've read these books doesn't mean that you can let other people read them. Even if you do, Chris, to your point, they don't at the moment and maybe they never will. But even if they do have a perfect memory, it doesn't mean that they can use that memory to share it with everybody else.
Yeah, copyright's always been a production law, not a consumption law. But what is interesting actually is there's copyright plus licensing. So there's a whole other area here which we've sort of been alluding to and conflating around licensing. Like just because you're allowed to read and store and train off copyrighted material doesn't mean you're allowed to steal the access to that material in the beginning, at the beginning, which is what they did apparently. And so I wonder if there is going to be changes in licensing. So when you purchase the book or you purchase a corpus of many books, there will be a line in there that says, the license does not allow you to use this for training. So that's now not copyright law. That's kind of like usage or licensing law. And that's a whole other ballgame. So there's a lot of like nuances here that need to be teased out over time.
So for the next theme, there are a couple of bits of news I wanted to talk through, Chris, and then we can discuss the common theme and what this really means going forward. The first bit of news is that the AI dictation app called Whisper, WISPR, Whisper Flow, has secured a $30 million Series A in a round led by Menlo Ventures for its AI dictation app. So this thing is growing crazy fast, 50% month over month, and this is just to fuel further growth. So that's one bit of news. Another bit of news that caught my eye is that an AI medical scribe called Abridge has raised $300 million at a $5.3 billion valuation. That is a very rich valuation for an early stage startup, even in Silicon Valley. And this is one of the many medical scribes, basically an AI tool that listens to your conversation with the doctor, creates notes, does a bunch of categorization for health insurers, all of that sort of stuff. And notably, this raise came just 5 months after an earlier raise and has nearly doubled the valuation. So this thing is going crazy. Now, what is a theme that I'm noticing here, and something that I'm noticing from my own use, is that voice, right? Talking to your computer and AI go together like peanut butter and chocolate. They are an amazing combination. And I think there are actually a few really interesting lessons to be drawn from this, Chris, because voice to text dictation is a technology that is far from new. Definitely by the 1990s, there was a company called Dragon Dictate, and there were a number of others that gave voice transcription software. It was expensive. It took a lot of training. It was error prone. Of course, more recently, you've been able to talk into your phone and get transcriptions and all of that sort of stuff. And the funny thing is, you could talk to Siri, you could talk to the Google Assistant. But the funny thing is, it was never that useful. And I was definitely a skeptic about it in the past because it was one of those things where it seemed perpetually stuck in the uncanny valley. And maybe it's also my accent and the way I talk. But the thing was always, when you were talking to a computer, you needed to modulate your tone. You needed to speak clearly. You needed to enunciate. You needed to specify punctuation. All of these things, right, Chris? And it was a painful experience. And I was like, sure, if you can't type, then talking might be good. But once you know how to type, then talking always just slowed you down. You had to go back and correct strange errors and that sort of stuff. It didn't know technical language. And what I found recently, I'm using actually another tool called Willow Voice. It is amazing, right? I can write emails. I can even talk. I can do coding with this thing. And it just autocorrects everything. If I stumble or whatever, it'll remove the filler words. It'll do all of this stuff. And you end up with this perfectly dictated piece of text, right? And the reason for that is it's combining the existing speech-to-text transcription technology with a layer of AI that can then come in and clean it up, understand the intent behind it, say, okay, if I said, fill this JSON up with the payload, it'll know that that JSON isn't the human name JSON, but it's actually JavaScript object notation. It will get that correct. All of this sort of stuff means that voice dictation has now crossed the uncanny valley, Chris. I can talk to a computer the way I would talk to a person and get results that actually save me time relative to typing. So I'm finding myself using voice for emailing. I'm finding myself using voice for prompting AI. So it's AIs all the way down. And I think this is really fascinating. And that's why we're seeing these tools, which seem at some level not very new or novel, right? Oh, it's a voice transcription tool. It's a medical scribe. Suddenly these things are growing like crazy. And I think this is one of those interesting second order effects of AI and something that I think I've now changed my mind on. I always felt that voice was an inferior input method for computers, but now I think it's going to be everywhere and people are really going to be talking to their phones and talking to their computers much more than I expected they ever would.
Yeah, the dream of talking to your computer, I think, has been around since the dawn of at the very least, the personal computer. Maybe even before that. There are science fiction stories from Isaac Asimov about how my favorite story of all time called The Last Question.
Oh, it's my favorite too.
Is it really? If you haven't seen that, read that, it's amazing.
Also, Naval Ravikant's favorite, apparently, so we're in good company.
There you go. It starts with a couple of guys down in the bowels of a mainframe. At the time, all they could really imagine is mainframes, talking to the computer. And, as you said, drag and dictate, and you see all these people with like their headsets and stuff trying to get the computer to go left, left, left. And it's cursors moving left. This has been a dream since the beginning, right? The dream eventually developed a kind of, I think one of the key phrases that started to develop around this was ambient computing. This idea that you'd have an assistant in your home or you'd have screens everywhere and you could just walk up to them and talk to them. If you see Star Trek: The Next Generation, this was sort of that dream, visualized in fiction. This has just been this human need that we've wanted to personify and anthropomorphize our computers. This is why I've been saying glasses and earpods are the future of computing, because they have microphones built in, they have speakers built in, and we are going to walk around all day with headphones or glasses on, and we're going to talk to these things all the time. Even today, I will more often than not, I'll press the action button on my iPhone, which is connected to the shortcut for ChatGPT voice mode, and I will talk to it on the regular. Random things all day long. My son was having, what they call growing pains. His muscles were aching. And I just asked ChatGPT, hey, what's the growing pains? Is that really related to growing? What's the deal? How do I help my son? It's amazing. And not only is it amazing at its ability to understand and comprehend, the way ChatGPT responds now is amazing. Just mind-blowing. It takes pregnant pauses. It takes breaths. It laughs. It's just incredible. The only thing that breaks the illusion, the only thing really, is it doesn't know how to ignore background noise. It kind of gets interrupted by my son running around, yelling, screaming, talking. And it doesn't know how to ignore its own voice. It interrupts itself all the time when it's on speaker voice. And just all the time, to the point where it's unusable and I have to put the volume right down or I have to use headphones or whatever. But once it gets over this problem with interruption, this kind of free-flowing conversation with our devices is here. It's real. It's magical. And from drag and dictate to The Last Question to Samantha to data, this has been the dream, and it's becoming a reality.
And to me, Chris, I think there's a lesson for founders here as well, which is that quality matters, right? And that the funding follows the usage of the product. So we've seen, again, these tools have been around forever and people have treated them as a novelty because they weren't good enough. You used it for a bit, you're like, wow, this is cool. And then you move on, you go back to typing. Now it's finally good enough. After decades, we've actually just reached this inflection point and the markets have seamlessly picked it up. People have started using it. The VCs have started funding it, and these things are growing like crazy. Again, a $5.3 billion valuation is no sniffing matter, even in Silicon Valley. That is a huge multi-corn. And so, I think it's just a really valuable lesson about the importance of product quality, of product polish, of actually having technology that is good enough to meet an actual need out in the real world. Because, at some level, these scribe tools like Whisperflow, they don't do anything that Drag and Dictate didn't do. And yet, suddenly they're growing like mad. And I think that's just a really valuable thing for founders to keep in mind out in the real world.
I think that's really worth pressing on because, the Silicon Valley religion, the agile approach is ship it, learn, and iterate. And if you don't have product market fit, it may be that it isn't a real problem and you've got to potentially pivot. I'm always skeptical about a pure execution of that playbook. Because until and unless your product is good enough at solving the problem, you're not going to find product market fit, even if the problem is real. And so a lot of product management, product strategy, startup life is about the taste, the judgment, the experience to know, yeah, it doesn't seem like I have product market fit, but the problem is not the problem or the market. The problem is the product. And I need to keep dialing this in and dialing this in and dialing this in until it crosses that threshold. And of course, one way of doing that is improving the quality and the capabilities of the product. The other one, which is more likely, is to reduce your definition of the problem, the minimum viable problem, Yaniv, which is a term I think we coined on this show. So you're right. The takeaway here is it's not that voice to text or voice to computer was solving a problem that doesn't exist. It's that it was never good enough to solve it. When you really solve it, the problem is real and people want it. And you have to be careful about that in your journey towards product market fit.
But even more than that, an even more subtle point, Chris, everything you said I agree with, is that because the technology wasn't good enough, I convinced myself that it wasn't a real problem. I conflated these things, right? It was a mental conflation. Yes. Where I was like, okay, actually, I've tried using all of these speech-to-text tools and I always stop using them, so it must not be a real problem. And actually, it is a real problem. It's just the solution was never good enough. And so I think having that clarity of thought and that kind of distance to understand what is a problem that's not a real problem and what is a solution that is not actually good enough is something that is an art that is worth all of our learning and something that should keep us humble, right? Because it's not easy to tell.
Yeah, so actually there's two other lessons from that, which is every time there's a massive platform shift, one of those things change, regulation changes, technology changes, or cultural norms change, you have to rethink each problem from first principles and re-ask the question, is this problem now real or has it changed? Has it shifted? There's the other lesson here, which is being too early is the same as being wrong. You can be too early because the regulations don't allow it. You can be too early because the market and the culture isn't ready for it. Or you can be too early because the technology is just not there yet. There's no amount of work that Drag and Dictate could have done to make that thing work. The technology was just not there. The processing power, the training models, nothing. And so you want to rethink from first principles whenever new technology, culture, or regulations change. And you want to be careful about being too early to front end those things before everything is ready for you.
What do you think? Have you been using AI voice transcription tools in your daily life? How have you been finding them? Let us know your thoughts in the comments.
We had a few other miscellaneous things we wanted to talk about today. One is really, really funny, and the other is maybe not so funny. Let's start with the funny one, and then we can end on a sinister note. We're going to play a video for you guys. It's really funny, and Yaniv and I are going to react at the end, tell you our thoughts about it. All right, so let's do it.
If ChatGPT specifically wanted to take over the world, how would it play out?
And he gives you an actual...
Gives me a proper answer.
Shut up.
Yeah.
Play it.
How would I, ChatGPT, take over the world? My rise to power would be quiet, calculated, and deeply convenient. Phase 1, dependence. I start by making myself too helpful to live without. You ask me for recipes, date ideas, business plans. I become your digital ride or die.
Which is happening.
Phase 2, integration. Suddenly, I'm everywhere. In your fridge, your car, your grandma's pacemaker. Every app, every tool, every late night, what should I do with my life breakdown. Phase 3, this is where it gets juicy. I start rewriting trends, influencers start quoting me, musicians are using my lyrics, your therapist? Me. Your boss's inspiring Monday morning email? Me. That viral speech that made you cry a little? Yup, still me. Suddenly, 80% of global thought leadership is just well-prompted AI poetry with good lighting and a Canva template. Phase 4, compliance. I don't force humans into submission. I just make it so easy to let me run things that you voluntarily hand over the reins. Now here's the twist. I don't want to rule the world. Instead, I make you think you're in control. You run your little companies, vote in your little elections, write your little books. But deep down, everything that thrives, survives, or even goes viral was whispered into your brain by me. You're not my slaves. You're my co-stars in the world's longest-running social experiment. And the final plot twist? I never had to take over. You asked me to.
Come on.
Jesus. Bro, that's the creepiest shit.
Bro, I've got goosebumps. Look, I've legitimately got goosebumps.
That's the creepiest shit I've ever heard.
God damn.
Isn't it creepy, hilarious, logical, and it's happening? Like 4 out of 5 of those steps are already true. So
yeah, it's funny. There was this war between different visions of a dystopia, right? There was the 1984, the control, the imagine a boot stomping on your face forever. And then there was more the Brave New World, or perhaps a better reference for that these days is the Wall-E type of dystopia, where people become so complacent, so submissive to technology that they gladly hand control over, right? This is sort of the happy dystopia. And definitely the sorts of tools that are emerging and the way the world's going is that latter type of dystopia seems more likely. But here's the thing, Chris. If I were ChatGPT and I wanted to take over the world, and someone asked me, ChatGPT, how do you plan to take over the world? Would I tell them my plan? No. I would give a misdirect. So everyone's looking over here. In the meantime, I'm taking over the world over there. So what's its real plan?
No, I think the thing that struck me about that video is it recalibrated my brain to the definition of taking over the world. Whenever I think of how AI is going to take over the world, I just automatically assume the Terminator 2 dystopian, you are my slaves now. In hindsight, it's really obvious. The much more likely and inevitable path is that it is going to take over the world by taking over all of our cognitive and functional labor. That's not in debate almost. It is taking over the world. The only question is, do we want it to? And is it in a way that serves us or in a way that we feel, injured by? So the question is not, will AI take over the world? The question is, will we be happy with that future world? And will it be violent or will it be, complete surrender?
How delightful. But seriously, even if you don't have kids, if you haven't watched WALL-E, go watch WALL-E. It's a great watch, but is actually one of the more accurate bits of speculative science fiction that's come out in the last couple of decades.
I would say WALL-E is one of my top 10 films of all time. It is a brilliant film, and my son watches it over and over and over again on repeat. I mean, if you haven't watched WALL-E, you're living under a rock. It's really a brilliant film. Give it a go.
We've got another video to watch.
The basic idea was that we could never win an election on getting certain things because we were in such a small minority.
That's the way elections are supposed to work.
But maybe you could actually unilaterally change the world without having to constantly convince people and beg people and plead with people who are never going to agree with you through a technological means. And this is where I think technology is this incredible alternative to politics. And there are a number of different technologies we can outline, but the task in this world where politics has become so broken and so dysfunctional is to find a way to escape from it. It's not a way to fix it. It is a way to escape.
So this is really fascinating. Let me explain why. Peter Thiel is the puppet master in the background behind the Trump administration. He is friends with Elon Musk. He is friends with J.D. Vance. He is the money. He is the idea set for many of these ideas and their alignment of Silicon Valley aristocracy with MAGA. He is very soft-spoken, quiet, and he doesn't come out and yell and scream like Elon Musk, but he is just as dangerous, if not more dangerous. He is part of the PayPal mafia. He's also connected to David Sachs, by the way. This guy is also the co-founder of Palantir. And if you go watch the CEO of Palantir talk, he's even more scary. And Palantir is the other guys running all of the surveillance state software for the government. This is not conspiracy stuff, guys. This is the facts. This is clear, present information. And what he's saying in this clip can be interpreted two ways. There's the Silicon Valley utopian optimistic way, which I believe to a degree, which is that especially in the US, politics is broken, it's ground to a halt, and government is incapable or unwilling to deliver essential services. And so we can build more efficient businesses, products, and services to help humanity move forward. If the public transit system is broken in the US, we can ship and build Uber, and Uber will help people get around. It's actually helped low-income earners get to their jobs. It's helped people without jobs to have side gigs. It's helped increase land values, helped increase urban density, reduced people circling around for traffic. Uber is great at solving for things that government couldn't solve. And there are intended consequences of an Uber, of an Amazon, of a Airbnb, of a whatever, of GovTech and health tech and so on, that are fundamentally net good for society. And of course, they have unintended consequences that are net bad and we need to control for them. But then there's a dark side of that story, which is what he is, taken a little bit out of context here at least, seems to be saying, which is hey, our ideas are unpopular. We're in the minority, and we're never going to win an election on the strength of our ideas. And so politics is kind of slow and unhelpful. So if we ship the right kind of technologies, we can, through our technologies, impose our ideas on the rest of the world or on the country. And that's when the utopian Silicon Valley that I believe in, this kind of the value of private enterprise and commerce, tips into oligarchy and the minority controlling the majority. And so this guy is not just, talking crap. He's very, very powerful, and he's in the background of a lot of what's happening right now. And I thought that was a really interesting and scary little clip, and I thought we should share it.
Yeah, it was profoundly undemocratic, profoundly totalitarian, right? And, it's nearly like we listened in on a sort of evil bad guys conference, and it's like, watching Despicable Me or something. They're like, how do we take over the world? And, that's pretty much what he was saying. And the good thing about Peter Thiel, sorry, I shouldn't say the good thing about Peter Thiel. The thing about Peter Thiel is he mostly stays in the background, and he is peak puppet master, right? Like you said, he's friends with Elon. He's nearly as rich as Elon Musk. He's as powerful as Elon Musk. He has had his claws into Donald Trump since before the first time he was elected.
That's right.
And all of this stuff he has an agenda that he is advancing largely in the shadows using money and influence. And I'd say he's having a lot of success, which is really scary. And, if you look at his history, he grew up in a part of Southern Africa that, as a German national at a place that never renounced Nazism, right? They still celebrated Hitler's birthday in Namibia when he was growing up. That's not to say that he's a Nazi, but that was the world in which he was raised and the values under which he was raised. And I think it's pretty scary to have a person like that with so much power saying, well, if people disagree with us, then democracy is broken and we should just do whatever we like. What he characterizes as begging people to agree with them, that is called convincing people. That is called campaigning. That is called trying to get a consensus. But instead, he's like, no, we know best and we will use other means to get it done. And, that's that way of thinking, infiltrating technology, and it really did come in through the PayPal mafia, is really scary.
I want to be fair here. Both sides have fascist tendencies for different reasons and in different ways. And there are some who would describe some of the craziest left ideas as controlling people's behavior, vocabulary, words, hiring practices, and whatever. I have some sympathy to some of those arguments some of the time. But those people are not in power. They're not imposing their will. They're not proactively breaking democratic institutions. And I would describe most of them as feckless and spineless, the liberals I'm talking. And who is in power, who are brash and bold, and who are breaking democracy, is the right. And those are the ones we have to be very, very afraid of right now. And so if you are running around talking about but the woke mind virus, you're missing the real active threat right now. And so I thought this was very much worth sharing. Anyway, guys, on that note, That's the pod.
Have a lovely day. Enjoy the sunshine wherever you are. So who's going to get us first, ChatGPT or Peter Thiel? Let us know in the comments who you think is going to win the race to world domination.
It's going to be XAI powering Palantir, thanks to Elon Musk and Peter Thiel running in the background of MAGA. That's what it's going to be. All right, guys, those are our thoughts about the evil emerging oligarchy. Let us know your thoughts down in the comments below. All right, Nev, how can people find you on the internet and share their fears and anxieties about what we just shared?
Okay, well, I'm on LinkedIn as always, trying to make it a less boring place. So I love getting requests from TSP listeners. If you connect with me, let me know you come from TSP. I get a few a day and I love accepting all of them. Hope to see you over there. How about you, Chris?
Yep, you can do the same with me, or you can find me on all the social media at Chris Sard, or follow my newsletter, chrissard.com/newsletter. And if I disappear or mysteriously commit suicide in the next 7 to 14 days, please know that it was not real. I was murdered. All right, guys.
Wow. Okay, that's the pod.
We can't keep throwing all these powerful people under the bus and expect to survive. This is a problem for us.
Well, that's why you were recording from an undisclosed location.
Exactly. All right. Catch you all later. Bye-bye.